Welcome to our program Ambassador in Town. I'm the host Yuichi HOSOYA, the Director of Research here at the International House of Japan. Today we have Canadian Ambassador to Tokyo, Ambassador Ian McKay. Ambassador McKay also play a very important role as a Canadian Special Envoy to the Indo-Pacific. Ambassador, welcome to Ambassador in Town and to the International House of Japan.
Thank you so much.
Canada is a pivotal country in the Indo-Pacific region, and the Canadian government published its own Indo-Pacific strategy in November 2022. It will be valuable opportunity for us to know how Canada is thinking about the future of this region. So let me ask several questions to you, Ambassador. You have had rich experience in Japan since you first came to Tokyo, Hokkaido in 1980, I think Ikeda town, right? How was your first impression about Japan around that period and Hokkaido there? What are the biggest changes in Japan in the last 4 decades since you first came to Japan?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for your time today. And yes, how lucky was I as a 16-year-old in 1980 to come and experience Japan as an exchange student. I was just there for 3 weeks at that time, in the summertime. It was a sister city exchange program.
I see.
But it created within me a real strong appetite to learn more about Japan. So I came back 1 year later. I lived in Yamaguchi-ken in Shimonoseki.
I see.
And eventually I came and worked in Tokyo in the finance industry for about 10 years. I think and then there were 25 years when I didn't live in Tokyo and I came back in my current role in 2021. My first impressions were, I think, similar to many foreigners when they first come to Japan, is that it's a very warm, engaging, polite, hospitable nation with some beautiful sights and some intriguing history and terrific culture and food. But I remember the first time when I flew into Hokkaido, the first thing I thought was how green it was. And that's an impression that lasts with me for a long, long time. You know, I spent some years in Tokyo in the 1980s, early 1990s. Today is a little bit different in that it's a bigger city. I think it's a more modern city. There's spectacular architecture and buildings. It's a very proud city, and it's a very powerful city. Tokyo today is, I think, widely regarded as one of, if not the greatest city in the world. And I think that's a real tribute to Japan and the Japanese people to build a city as wonderful as Tokyo.
I see. So you have been seeing the transformation of that Tokyo
Absolutely.
City. I see. So let me move on to the next question. Canadian government published Canada's Indo-Pacific strategy in November 2022, as I mentioned. You mentioned into Japanese media that it marked the biggest change in Canadian foreign policy in decades. What are the biggest changes which the Indo-Pacific strategy brought?
Well, it was. I think it is the biggest shift in Canadian foreign policy in many, many decades. I think it's important to understand that historically, Canada, at the political level, commercial and business level, cultural level, has very strong historical ties with Europe, with France and England being the founding partners of our country. And we then developed a very strong, very powerful relationship with the United States. And that really determined and dictated our economic policies, our foreign policies, our cultural assimilations for a long, long time. And we, of course, realized that as a Pacific nation, because Canada is indeed a Pacific nation, it was very important that we build a strategy to strengthen Canada's engagement in the Indo-Pacific region, which, of course, is the fastest economic growing region in the world. And so the strategy is meant to shift how Canadians think about the world by engaging more in the Indo-Pacific.
I see. You know Japan well, and you know business, of course, well. So I suppose that you have been pulling Canadian foreign policy to the Indo-Pacific region, I suppose.
I've been trying with my whatever influence, whatever voice I have to really to make politicians in Canada, business people in Canada, students in Canada think more about Japan and this entire region.
I see. China is Japan's biggest trading partner, of course, very important country. And of course, Canada is very important partner to Canada as well, I suppose. So I think that even though China is very important country to both Japan and Canada, but at the same time, China has been presenting many challenges at the same time. So in Canada's Indo-Pacific strategy, China is described as an increasing disruptive global power which engages in coercive behavior, economic or otherwise, ignores human rights obligations or undermines our national security interests and those of partners in the region, unquote. Can you point out a few events which sharply transformed Canadian perception of Japan, of China? Of course, China is still a very important country to both Japan and Canada, but at the same time, China is a difficult country as well to deal with. So how do you see the transformation of the Canadian perception of China in the last several years?
Well, I'll start with and you referenced this, China is Japan's biggest trading partner. And for us, the United States is our biggest trading partner.
Okay.
And so I think because of our relationships with the two dominant economic powers in the world, I think Canada and Japan are building a much stronger political and commercial alliance as we deal with some of the challenges we have with our biggest global trading partners. But recall that Canada and China have a diplomatic relation that goes back to 1970. It was October 13th, 1970, when Canada and China formalized diplomatic relationships. So we were there well before most Western industrialized countries. And we've had a terrific relationship at the political level, the business level, the people-to-people level. There's an extraordinary diaspora of Chinese Canadians all across Canada. And we've had a terrific relationship. Now, as China has become a more dominant economic and military power, of course, they're flexing their muscle and they're creating some challenges as we work through our relationship together. I think, again, the Indo-Pacific strategy for Canada is in part to give us more credibility throughout the Indo-Pacific region so we can formulate a more mature, more substantive, more dynamic relationship with China as well as all the other countries in the region.
I think that you're right in saying that both United States and China are really important country to both Japan and Canada. And at the same time, we have been seeing emergence of a structural confrontation between the United States and China. If we need both United States and China, we have to look at the nature of the current relationship between the two superpowers, China and the United States. And at the same time, as a kind of a middle path, I think that Japan and Canada are able to shape the regional future order. So I think that it is more important than before for the two countries, I mean the Japan and Canada, to try to coordinate the approach to the region for the purpose of making the structure of the international order in the Indo-Pacific.
Indeed, and I think there are some very concrete examples how Canada and Japan are working very closely together, but also being very leading strong voices in areas such as the CPTPP. We, of course, are founding charter members of that trade agreement. This is an extraordinarily important, very high-level trade agreement that focuses on the Indo-Pacific region. And it was really Canada and Japan who decided this was an important framework to build and to build upon. And I think we're both grateful that more and more countries would like to join the CPTPP.
Right.
The other thing where we've done a lot of work together is former Prime Minister Abe created the concept of a free and open Indo-Pacific many years ago, and he shared that vision with Canada, for sure. And we have embraced that concept. It was in large part a big motivation for us to build our Indo-Pacific strategy. We're also leading voices at the WTO, Canada and Japan, to make sure that free and fair rules-based trade continues to be the way that trade is managed in the region, when there are some players who would like to do trade in a different way. So I think these are very important steps that we are taking together to provide stability and rules-based international order throughout this region.
Yeah, I cannot agree with you more. I agree that basically both Canada and Japan are quite global power, respecting the importance of the rule of law, respecting the importance of multilateralism. And the two countries, both Japan and Canada are not military superpowers. That's why we need to rely more upon the importance of rule-based international order. So I suppose that I fully agree with former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe that Canada is really our important country. Without Canadian contribution, I think that Japan couldn't create the CPTPP. And without the Canadian effort to try to coordinate the voice of liberal democracies in the regions, I think that Prime Minister Abe couldn't create such a free and open Indo-Pacific vision. So in that way, I think that Prime Minister Shinzo Abe highly value the importance of the cooperation between the two democracies, Japan and Canada.
Yeah. And I think, you referenced the military component. We're working very closely together with Japan to remind people that the waterways, South China Sea, East China Sea, Taiwan Strait, these are very profoundly important international waterways that are important for global trade. And as you know, Canada has recently stepped up our efforts to have naval frigates, aircraft in the region to demonstrate that this will and should continue to be open, free waterways for international good.
Yeah, in that way, I always feel that Canada is a true like-minded partner to Japan. So let me ask you my last question to you. In addition to your important role, of course, as a Canadian ambassador to Japan, you are also appointed as Canadian Special Envoy to the Indo-Pacific region. I suppose this is the first Canadian Special Envoy to the Indo-Pacific, right?
Yes.
And how do you describe your role as Canadian Special Envoy to the Indo-Pacific? What are the activities so far?
Well, I think it's an important role, and I'm very glad that the government of Canada decided to appoint somebody in this region to take on this important role. It's a role that requires some coordination of all of my colleagues in the region at Canadian embassies and consulates. It's a role that requires me to, in essence, evangelize to our partner countries in the region about the objectives of Canada's Indo-Pacific strategy. And it's a role that very much brings the communication from our intelligence on the ground here in the region to our headquarters in Ottawa to make sure that we're all using the same information as we move forward. It's a very comprehensive policy. As you know, it talks about security and trade and people-to-people exchange and climate activities and diplomacy, building up Canada's diplomatic presence in the region. So there's a lot of moving parts, but it's a very well-resourced strategy, and I'm just delighted and honored to have some small part in making sure that we move it forward as effectively as possible.
Great. Japan and Canada are not military superpowers, but if we wish to see the continuation of the peace and the stability, prosperity of the region, I'm sure that the Japanese and the Canadian contribution to the region would be essential. So in that way, I think that we need to continue much stronger collaboration between the two countries.
I concur. We can make a difference, and we will make a difference, and we are grateful for the increasingly strong partnership that Canada has with Japan at every level, and we're looking forward to continuing that.
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador, for your participation and for your contribution to the region.
Thank you for your help.